Ever feel like your brain is playing tricks on you? Like, those times when you jump to conclusions, especially when it comes to like forming opinions?
Yeah.
Turns out we all have these mental shortcuts
Right.
called cognitive biases.
Yeah.
And today we're going to take a deep dive into how these biases can really mess with our decision making, particularly in education.
It's true, yeah. Our brains are wired for efficiency.
Right.
And sometimes that means sacrificing a little accuracy
Yeah.
along the way.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What are cognitive biases exactly, and how do they work?
Think of them as mental shortcuts based on our experiences,
Okay.
our beliefs, even our interactions with others.
Yeah.
They help us process information quickly, which can be super useful
Right.
in a complex world.
Yeah.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
Sometimes those shortcuts lead us to make inaccurate judgments.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
It is.
Helpful in some ways, but potentially problematic in others. And you're saying these biases are particularly relevant in education.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine a teacher who sees a student dressed in a certain way
Yeah.
and immediately makes assumptions about their academic ability.
Wow.
Or a school board member who clings to outdated research
Oh, wow.
because it supports their existing beliefs
Yeah.
about education reform.
That's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
It sounds like these biases can have a real impact on how students are treated,
Yeah.
how decisions are made, and even the overall school climate.
Exactly. And the thing is, we all have these biases.
Right.
It's not about pointing fingers or labeling people as biased.
Right.
It's about understanding how these mental shortcuts work
Yeah.
so we can mitigate their negative effects and make more objective, well-informed choices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But where do we even begin? There are so many different biases out there.
Right.
Our sources highlighted 8 key ones,
Okay.
and they grouped them really cleverly into 3 categories,
Yeah.
based on when they tend to influence our decisions before, during, and after we make them. Let's start with that before category. What are some of the biases that sneak in even before we've consciously
Right.
made up our minds?
One that immediately comes to mind is the halo effect.
Okay.
It's the tendency for our first impression of someone,
Okay.
whether positive or negative, to influence our subsequent judgments about them.
So, if a student makes a great first impression on a teacher,
Exactly.
that teacher might unconsciously give them the benefit of the doubt later on, even if their work doesn't always live up to that initial expectation.
Exactly. Studies actually show that teachers unconsciously favor more attractive students,
Right.
giving them higher grades and more attention.
Wow.
It's a subtle bias, but it can have a real impact on a student's educational experience.
Wow. That's a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many of our judgments are actually based on merit versus these unconscious bias. What else falls into this before category?
Another big one is the anchoring bias.
Okay.
This is our tendency to fixate on the first piece of information we receive about something,
Right.
and then use that as a reference point for all subsequent judgments.
Can you give us an example of how this might play out in a school setting?
Absolutely. Imagine you're a teacher involved in salary negotiations.
Okay.
If the school board initially proposes a very low salary increase, you might feel pressured to accept the slightly higher offer,
Right.
even if it's still far below what you deserve.
Yeah.
That initial lowball offer acts as an anchor,
Oh, okay.
influencing your perception of what's fair and reasonable.
That's such a great example. It really highlights how these biases can operate on a subconscious level, shaping our perceptions without us even realizing it.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the halo effect and the anchoring bias, both lurking in the shadows before we even consciously make a decision. What happens once we're actively in the process of making a choice?
Right.
What biases tend to pop up then?
That's when biases like confirmation bias and the false consensus effect can really take hold.
Confirmation bias? That one sounds particularly tricky.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's the tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if that means ignoring evidence that contradicts them.
So it's like we're selectively choosing data to fit our own narrative.
Precisely. Imagine a school board debating a new curriculum.
Okay.
A member who strongly believes in traditional teaching methods might focus solely on studies,
Right.
highlighting the limitations of project-based learning,
Okay.
dismissing any research suggesting its benefits.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like our brains are trying to protect us from information that might challenge our worldview.
In a way, yes. but it can lead us down a dangerous path
Right.
of closed-mindedness and stagnation.
So how do we guard against this? It can't be easy to constantly question our own beliefs.
It takes effort and intentionality.
Right.
One key is to actively seek out diverse perspectives, even those that make us uncomfortable.
Okay.
Another is to develop cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to see the nuances in a situation
Okay.
and consider multiple viewpoints.
That sounds like a valuable skill, especially in the world of education where there are so many different opinions and approaches.
Absolutely. And speaking of differing opinions, that brings us to the false consensus effect.
Yes. Tell our listeners about that one.
This bias is all about overestimating how much others agree with us.
Okay.
We assume our opinions are more common than they actually are,
Yeah.
which can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts.
I can see how that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Can you give us a real-world example?
Imagine a principal who's passionate about a new discipline policy.
Okay.
They might assume everyone on staff shares their enthusiasm,
Right.
only to discover many teachers have serious concerns
Yeah.
that failure to recognize differing opinions can create division and make it harder to implement changes effectively.
It sounds like clear communication is key here.
Absolutely.
Making sure everyone feels heard and understood,
Yeah,
even if they don't agree with the ultimate decision.
exactly. It's about fostering a culture of respectful dialogue
Right.
where dissenting opinions are valued rather than dismissed.
Okay, so we've covered two major biases that can influence us while we're in the midst of making a decision.
Right.
Confirmation bias and the false consensus effect.
Yeah.
What about those biases that sneak in after we've already made a choice?
Right.
Do any particular ones stand out to you?
Oh, definitely. One that's particularly relevant in education is the misinformation effect.
That one sounds intriguing. Break it down for us.
It's the tendency for our memories of an event
Okay.
to become distorted by information we encounter afterward. Research shows that even subtle leading questions can influence a witness's memory,
Okay.
which has huge implications for how schools handle investigations, ensuring fairness and accuracy.
So if there's a disagreement between two students and a teacher asks a leading question like, did Sarah push you?
Yeah,
That could actually influence the student's recollection of what happened.
exactly.
Wow.
It's a reminder that eyewitness accounts,
Right.
while valuable, aren't always completely reliable.
Okay.
We need to be careful about the information we expose ourselves to after an event,
Yeah.
as it can subtly shape our memories and perceptions.
That's a bit unsettling, but also incredibly important to be aware of
Right.
what other biases lurk in this after category.
Well, there's the classic hindsight bias,
Okay.
which is that I knew it all along
Yeah.
feeling we get
Right.
after something happens, even if it was unpredictable at the time.
I know that one all too well. It's so easy to look back and
Right.
think we saw the signs, even if we didn't.
Exactly. And in education, this bias can be dangerous.
Oh.
If a student drops out, teachers might say,
Yeah.
we saw this coming.
Right.
He was always struggling, even if they didn't take any steps to intervene earlier.
Because they convinced themselves they knew all along, so there was no need to change their approach.
Precisely. It can create a dangerous cycle of inaction
Right.
and missed opportunities for intervention.
And finally, we have the self-serving bias, which sounds like it could be particularly problematic for educators.
It certainly can be. This bias is our tendency to take credit for our successes while blaming external factors for our failures.
Okay.
It's a way of protecting our ego
Right.
and maintaining a positive self-image.
So if a teacher's students get high test scores,
Yeah.
they might attribute it to their excellent instruction.
Exactly.
But if the scores are low, they
Right.
might blame it on the student's lack of effort or a poorly designed test.
Exactly. And while it's natural to want to feel good about ourselves,
Right.
this bias can prevent us from honestly assessing our strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
which is essential for growth and improvement.
Because if we're always pointing fingers outward, we'll never see the need to reflect on our own practices and make necessary adjustments.
That's the danger. It can lead to a stagnation of skills and a lack of accountability. And in a field like education,
Yeah.
where we're constantly striving to improve and meet the needs of our students,
Right.
that could be a real obstacle.
This has been such an insightful exploration of these 8 cognitive biases. From the halo effect to the self-serving bias. It's amazing how these mental shortcuts
It is.
can so subtly shape our perceptions and influence our decisions in the world of education.
It really highlights the importance of ongoing self-reflection and a commitment to continuous learning.
Yeah.
We need to be constantly questioning our assumptions and seeking out diverse perspectives
Right.
to ensure we're making well-informed, equitable decisions.
But how do we actually put these insights into practice?
Right.
Are there specific strategies we can use to overcome these biases and make more objective, well-informed choices?
Absolutely. While we can't completely eliminate these biases,
Right.
they're part of how our brains work. We can certainly mitigate their negative effects.
Okay.
And one of the most powerful tools at our disposal is something we call courageous collegiality.
Courageous collegiality. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's about creating a school culture where open and honest communication is not only valued but expected.
Okay.
It's about fostering an environment where teachers feel comfortable sharing their observations and concerns with each other, where administrators are receptive to feedback, and where everyone is committed to collective growth and improvement.
So it's not about calling each other out
Right.
or placing blame,
Exactly.
but rather working together to identify blind spots
Yeah.
and support each other in making more objective decisions.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have biases.
Right.
And the best way to address them is through open dialogue,
Yeah.
constructive feedback, and a shared commitment to creating a more equitable and just learning environment for all students.
That sounds like a powerful antidote to the dangers of unchecked biases.
Yeah.
But how do we actually cultivate this courageous collegiality in a school setting? What does it look like in practice?
Well, it starts with building trust and
Wow.
psychological safety within the school community.
That's so important.
It is, yeah.
When teachers feel safe taking risks and being vulnerable with each other,
Yeah,
they're more likely to speak up when they see something that seems off or unfair.
exactly.
So it's about creating a space where people feel comfortable challenging each other,
Right.
even those in positions of authority, without fear of retribution.
Exactly. And it's about those in leadership positions, modeling that vulnerability and openness to feedback.
Right.
When administrators are willing to admit they don't have all the answers and are open to learning from others, it creates a culture of humility and continuous improvement.
It sounds like it takes a conscious effort
It does.
to shift the school culture away from competition and toward collaboration.
Right.
What are some concrete steps schools can take to foster this courageous collegiality?
One practical approach is to establish regular opportunities for professional development, focused specifically on recognizing and mitigating biases.
So not just your typical workshops on classroom management or curriculum design, but sessions that really delve into the complexities of our own thinking and decision-making processes.
Exactly. These sessions could involve exploring case studies, practicing giving and receiving feedback, and developing strategies for promoting equity and inclusion in all aspects of school life.
It sounds like it's not just about individual teachers becoming more aware of their own biases, but rather creating a collective commitment to identifying and addressing systemic biases within the school as a whole.
That's a crucial point. Courageous collegiality is about holding each other accountable. Not in a punitive way, but in a supportive and growth-oriented way. It's about creating a shared responsibility for ensuring that all students have access to a fair and equitable education.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
We've uncovered these hidden biases that can so easily influence our decisions in education. And we've explored practical strategies for mitigating their negative effects. What are your final thoughts for our listeners as they navigate this complex terrain?
Well, remember that recognizing our biases is not about being perfect. It's about being aware, reflective, and willing to challenge our own assumptions. It's about embracing the discomfort of growth and recognizing that we all have blind spots.
And it's about remembering that this work is never truly finished.
Absolutely.
It's an ongoing process of learning, unlearning, and relearning.
Exactly. And the more we engage in this process, the more we create a school environment that's truly fair, just and inclusive for every student.
So as you move forward in your own educational journeys, whether as students, parents, or educators, remember to approach each interaction with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to challenge your own perspectives.
Absolutely.
And never underestimate the power of courageous collegiality.
Yes.
When we work together to identify and address our biases, we create a more equitable and just world for everyone.
Well said.
We've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of cognitive biases in education.
Yeah.
I hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
Me too.
Remember to stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop learning.
Right.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of knowledge.
Okay.
Until then, keep those mental gears turning.